Hello, everyone. Charlie, Will, Eric, Sebastian, Gina, and Samuel. What a big group of people we have here today. An awesome group. Thanks for being here, everyone. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. It's going to be super fun to have you on the show. You know, I know there's so many people out there that are dreaming of an open source project or even working on open source and contributing to it, but it's something they squeeze in the last hour of their day. And at some point, all of you have made this amazing transition to where there's enough support, there's enough interest in what you all have built that becomes your full-time thing, right? Which is, I know for many out there, living the dream. So you all are living the dream. I'm hopefully you feel that way. But it's going to be really great to kind of just explore your projects. How do you make that transition? And you know what you're up to. So we have Samuel Colvin on from Pydantic, and he has the tightest schedule. He's squeezing us in on a far-flung trip, work trip. So let's go to you first, Samuel. Just tell people a bit about who you are and what your project is to get started.
I'm Samuel. I maintain Pydantic, which is a data validation library for Python that uses type hints. So those weird things you've seen after the colon in Python that mostly do nothing unless you run MyPy or Pywrite. Pydantic basically enforces them. Almost exactly a year ago, I was sort of working on Pydantic full time by then, but really spending my own money to do so. And a big American VC got in touch, and fast forward, I raised some money and started a company. Beginning of this year, I hired now with 10 people. And I'm actually, as you mentioned, I'm in Istanbul at the moment with the whole team. It turns out if you have a team with Americans, Iranians, and Russians, that Istanbul is one of the few places that you can actually meet efficiently. So we're having a really fun week in Istanbul, mostly working together and then going out for dinner, which is where we are at the moment. I hope that's a good quick summary.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a cool experience that you get to hang out with all these people talking about your project in Istanbul. I just had.
I would just think the other thing I would add is that one of the best bits of it has been being able to hire friends of mine from open source, people who had, I think all but two of the people here have contributed to Pydantic before we started the company, which is how I hired the first, I think, 6 people and then a few more. So one of the best bits has been hiring other people to come and work on open source with me while still being able to pay them properly. It's been really fun.
Yeah, awesome. I see a lot of people shaking their head out there as well. I just coincidentally, I recently had Sydney Runkle on, who works with you, and she's such an inspiration. That show is not out yet, but has already been done yet through the weird time shifting of podcasting. So it'll be out before this, but it's not out yet. So anyway, very, very cool team you got there. All right. I guess we'll go around the order of the video Brady Bunch pictures here. So Charlie, you're up next.
Sure. Hey, so I'm Charlie. I am the author of Rough, which is a Python linter code formatter and code transformation tool written in Rust. I started working on Rough about a year ago, maybe October of last year.
Similar time frame to Samuel, yeah.
Yeah, and I worked on it full time for a while. Similar to Samuel, although probably not for quite as long. I was working on it full time without any funding, and then similarly, I started a company around Rough and really around the vision of trying to build high performance Python tools. So take some of the things that make Rough nice to use and popular and well liked, and try to apply those principles to other parts of the Python toolchain. So we're a team of 6. And we're fully remote, so no 2 of us live in the same I guess a couple of us live in the same country, but most of us live in different countries. Yeah. And we span basically US Central Time to I don't know what we have one person in India and one person in Minneapolis, and that kind of stretches the full time zones of the team.
That's a good stretch. It's a good stretch there. Well, absolutely. Congratulations on Rough. It is really, really taken off. And I know the guy right below you in the squares, Sebastian I saw him saying nice things about it with Fast API and so on.
Yeah, I know. Thanks a lot. It's just funny because I think I was saying before I started recording, I think when I came on Talk Python last time, I think that might have been my first time ever on a podcast. So, and it was to talk about Rough. And so I was like, oh, wow, people care about what I'm doing. That's super cool. And Pydantic and Fast API were some of the earliest adopters that people had heard of. So they were like very early on in the life cycle and helped a lot with, getting people to see Rough and sort of care about Rough and know that smart people are using it.
That's awesome. Well, when you visit Talk Python or the courses website or others, it's all roughified. I don't know what the adjective of rough is, but it's been rough.
It's whatever you want.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. So roughed up. It's been roughed up and it works great. It's really amazing.
That makes the code sound really bad, but
no, it's true.
Yeah, that's maybe not.
It's like saying it's sick. Like, oh, that was a sick trick they did. It means good.
That code is rough.
That code is rough, man. All right, Will, is your code rough? Who are you?
It's got some rough edges, certainly.
Welcome.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm Will. I'm probably best known for a library called Rich, and Rich is a library for writing formatted content in Terminal. You can output tables and progress bars and syntax highlighted code, all sorts of things. And then that became quite popular in the Python world. I think there was a need for it. And 2 years ago, I founded Textualize, which is a company which builds on Rich to produce a library called Textual, which allows you to build user interfaces inside Terminal. And these are kind of like more like web interfaces and less like Curses applications.
Yeah, I was just thinking almost like Flexbox. You can dock stuff to the side, and that's part of UI. But it's pretty amazing what you built.
Yeah,
I think it's pushed the terminal far beyond what many people thought the terminal should be doing.
It's been very cool. It's been a process of discovery. It's kind of strange. You've got a technology that's been around for decades, and are still discovering things that they can do, which people haven't tried before. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And it's been great to work with a small team of developers. We've got a small core here in Edinburgh, Scotland, and we got one developer in Portugal. So yeah, it's been great, and I love the reception and I love what people are building with it.
Yeah, it's so many people are interested in using Rich, and there's a ton of plugins, right? There's like Rich Click and there's PyTest Rich and all these things. Like, well, whatever we're doing, it should also have what you built, you know?
Yeah, I love to see that. I love to see the ecosystem building. Our adjective is richified.
Richified, okay.
Yeah.
Not just, that's rich. My code is rich. Okay,
yeah,
richified, got it. I love it. We all have adjectives that we got to put on things.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of you and your team's work, by the way. I mean, I'm sure you hear it all the time, but you build awesome stuff.
Cheers, I appreciate it.
Yeah, indeed. We all are. Eric, welcome. You and I are coming in somewhat local here out of Portland, not Istanbul.
Well, I'm actually out in Bend at the moment.
Are you in Bend? Okay, well, I absolutely love Bend. So.
Yeah, so lots of mountains and whatnot. But yeah, so my background in mariculture, folks probably know me from kind of the Read the Docs ecosystem. I feel like I've been doing this for a while compared to everyone else here. The project actually started in 2010, which is kind of amazing. And then we actually started the company around it in 2014. So coming up next year, that'll be 10 years. And we're all bootstrapped, so we haven't done any venture capital. It's all been kind of just built up the open source and then kind of turned it into a company on top of that. We kind of have a business model of doing paid for private hosting, companies, as well as advertising on open source. And we spun out a kind of a separate business called Ethical Ads that we built kind of to basically make, better advertising on the internet, not doing any of the creepy tracking stuff. So.
I mean, Read the Docs is so critical to the open source space, not just Python, but especially Python.
Yeah.
And then, so awesome work on that. And then just, good job on the ad stuff as well. It's the tendency of the whole ad space is to be super creepy and just like, how much can we resell and how much can we buy to mix in to like create these shadow profiles? And it's not a good social trend. It's not good for people, and it's not really necessary, right? Like if I want to, I've sponsored ads on Read the Docs, or had run ads on Read the Docs before, and I mean, we had a Flask course, and let's just run that ad on Flask instead of like, let's see if we can track somebody through Instagram over to Facebook, over to
right?
wherever. Exactly.
Like, we call it newspaper advertising, and it's sort of been really cool with the advances of ML. Like the content targeting has gotten pretty good, right? So it's definitely a lot easier technically these days to kind of do that content matching. But I think in terms of the kind of open source, maybe the way that I'm a little different than other folks here is we're actually running something more akin to a service. So Read the Docs, all the code is open source, but a lot of the usage is open source projects using our hosted service. We do obviously ship a lot of code. Probably our Sphinx theme is probably the most kind of well-known actual software that people are running, a little bit similar to the folks here, the kind of sidebar on the left. And so I think that's kind of the background is, we have a little bit of everything, but it's a little more akin to something like a SaaS app, I would say, but the code is all open source. We do get contribution in that way as well.
Yeah, awesome. And it sounds a little similar to what Textualize is working towards as well, hosting. I mean, it's more hosting people's apps than hosting people's apps.
No, I mean,
not terribly different.
Paying for services is a classic open source monetization strategy, right? Like you have some way to kind of build the monetization on top. So
yeah, it's like what you build is great, but it's kind of hard for me to run. Could you just do that? Like, yeah, sure, we can do that. Sebastian, always good to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me. Hello, everyone. I'm Sebastian Ramirez, or Triangulo. I created this little tool for building web APIs that is called Fast API, and it has been growing quite a bit. People have liked it, fortunately. And that's it. I'm probably the only one that hasn't built a company here, I guess. Okay, maybe. Okay, then there are two of us. Nice. I want to hear that. Okay, so this year I have been able to work full-time on open source because Sequoia Capital, the VC firm, started this open source fellowship. And I am the first fellow, so I am kind of the test trial of like the program. So I get, just to work full-time on open source. And that's how I've been able to just, release a bunch of stuff in FastAPI and the ecosystem, like the other libraries, FastAPI, SQL Model, Hyper, and like a couple of other things. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, FastAPI is definitely the poster child for modern Python on the web, and Samuel's work obviously is central to that as well, right? With Pydantic being such a core element there. So very awesome. And
FastAPI is built on top of like great open source tools underneath. So Pydantic does all the data validation, serialization, documentation, and on the other side, Starlet does all the web parts. It's like, and like it's a very close. How do you call it? Like close friendship between all the projects. Yes. Pydantic, Starlet, Ubicorn, FastAPI, we actually know by this point, we actually know each other in person. Like the current maintainer of Starlet and Ubicorn works for the Pydantic company. And he's like the top FastAPI expert right now. It's very nice because it helps the dynamism of like
yes,
speed
absolutely.
Of building stuff is great. So
Yeah, I imagine a lot of people don't realize the interconnections between these different projects that are at play here. Yeah,
it's definitely super fun.
Absolutely.
And then it's worth saying we in Pydantic use FastAPI as well as contributing to the libraries that build it. We also use FastAPI for the services that we're building. So we're like consumers, both directly and indirectly, of the things that we maintain in open source. So awesome. And chat quite often to Sebastian. So it's awesome.
It's turtles all the way down, basically.
Exactly.
Gina, also awesome to have you back. Willkommen.
Yeah, very happy to be back. That's really, really great to be here now, I think, for the second time. So, and the third if we call Python Bytes. My name is Gina Heuske, and I'm probably, I don't know if I'm that well known throughout the Python community, but I'm quite well known in the 3D printing community for having created Octoprint, which is the snappy web interface for your 3D printer, and the server part of that is all written in Python. And I started a project back in 2012 when I got my first 3D printer as your regular pet project on the side, after hours, vacation, blah, blah, blah. In 2014, I got hired by a 3D printing company to work on it full time. And in 2016, that company ran out of money, and I suddenly found myself with a full-fledged, full-grown open source project and no funding whatsoever. So I tried this whole crowdfunding stuff with Patreon, and that is pretty much how I've been working ever since. So I'm self-employed under German law. I'm a freelancer. And yeah, all my income comes from people who just send me money for working on Octoprint.
Did you say since 2016?
Since 2016, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
So full time since 2014, and self-employed and crowdfunded since 2016. So it's been a while.
That's awesome. I also went full time on all my stuff here in 2016, although it's technically not open source. It talks a whole lot about open source stuff. So
totally
awesome. But it's been a while. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm still surprised it works, to be honest. I'm waiting every day that it stops working. And yeah, actually this year it came a bit close, and then I put out like a blog post basically along the lines of, like the income is going this, but the usage numbers are going that. So something is amiss here and we need to talk. And then the community rallied and stuff fixed itself again. So that's pretty amazing.
That's really awesome. Congratulations. It's easy for people to just go, oh, it's free, and there's some people supporting it, and just kind of assume that things are taken care of. But yeah, really good. Yeah, you have a ton of supporters on GitHub sponsors as well, right?
Yeah, I've diversified over the years. And in the beginning, it was only Patreon and PayPal, and then I started adding new payment platforms and options because people prefer to be able to use the stuff that they know, and some people don't like Patreon, some people don't like or don't know GitHub sponsors and stuff, and so you just give them the options to choose whatever they feel comfortable with, and this increases the likelihood that they actually will go through with throwing something in your head, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least that's my feeling. I don't know.
I think the GitHub sponsors has been really positive for open source. I think it's made it pretty easy to just check a box. They already have your credit card potentially, and you just want to give a little support instead of one-time PayPal donation here that you forget about after once and all that. Yeah. Before we move on here, there's a funny comment, nice comment out. Kanish says, this group, looking at all of you, you guys are the Avengers of Python open source, right? Which is kind of like the superheroes. I love it. It's somewhat actually true, it seems. Okay. So the next thing I want to ask is a little bit of an origin story. What projects did you try and then didn't really get traction? And then, how do you think that your project got traction here? And I know, Samuel, you might vanish any minute, so you're next. You're up first on this one.
That's really interesting. I've built a number of things in open source. I started something last week. I open sourced on Friday that has got more stars over the last 3 days, or I guess week now, as the first project I started, ARQ'd, has over, I think, coming up on 6 years. So I mean, that's front end, and front end gets a lot more traction than like queuing an RPC does. But I don't know how, like, obviously there's some things I played with back then that never took off, but yeah, it was this, like, I think I was in the right time, right place for Typehints. They'd obviously been around in Python for a long time, but back in 2017 when I started Pydantic, their usage was growing really fast, and I think there were lots of people like me who found it kind of frustrating that they were there and didn't do anything. So yeah, I think being the right time, right place was super valuable for me. And obviously, like great projects like Fast API adopting Pydantic had made a big difference. But I don't know what's weird if you look at the download chart is like there was this inflection point at the beginning of 2021. So then we had like 5 million downloads a month, and since then there's been kind of almost exactly linear growth to now 125 million downloads a month. So something weird happened in 2021, long after the project was started. I don't know. But yeah, I think it was right place, right time, and that frustration was the starting point. On that note, I'm going to have to rush, guys, but it's great to see everyone.
All right.
And I'm sure I'll meet you all at a conference soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for dropping in.
Good to see you.
No problem. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All right. Charlie, keep going around the circle here.
Of course. Yeah, it's interesting because I like Rough is really my first time being a maintainer and like publishing like I've been a consumer of open source, right, for my whole career, but I was never really I guess like a creator or a publisher or a maintainer of open source. And it's around the time that I started working on Rough, I was working on like a couple different projects, and they all I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I'd left my job recently, and Rough was kind of motivated by a lot of the experiences I had at my job, where I was like maintaining a large Python code base.
Did you leave your job with the intent of going to work on Rough, or were you just like, I'm going to leave and then I'm going to figure something out?
It's funny. I left my job.
What was the process?
I left my job with the intent of starting a company. But I did not think it would be Rough, and Rough was like this distracting side project that I was working on while I was like, I was working with a friend, and we were like trying to figure out like the Venn diagram of interests of like, what are we willing to work on full time together? What makes sense given like our interests? And then in all my free time, I was like, I just want to work on developer tools. And like, I built Rough, or I started building Rough. I worked on like, I worked on a lot of different, not a lot, but like was working on a couple different projects. I did like a sort of CI/CD thing where you like write Docker files and like CI files in TypeScript, and they like transpile down. And I was like, oh, I think that has a lot of cool ideas. I worked on like it was pretty early in a lot of the LLM stuff. I worked on like a code base wide refactoring tool where you like give it examples of like before and after, and then it tries to find examples. It was like a co-pilot for your entire code base. It didn't work that well like at scale, but it was like a cool idea. So I was like working on this stuff. It was all open source.
That maybe could have been a timing thing. Like maybe today that would be all the.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like it's also an effort thing. I guess like I put a lot more into Rough, and it was interesting because I kept viewing Rough as like it was probably open source at that point, but I don't think I had launched it. And I kept viewing it as like I said, like a little bit of a distraction. And my friend was like, I think you should really like push to like release this, because like if you think it's like interesting, then like other people will probably think it's interesting. And he was the person that really like motivated me to actually like see it through to doing the release. And then I did the release, and like a lot of people were actually interested in it. So that kind of gave me like the energy to like really start working on it full time and just kind of see where it went. And it was really like projects like Pydantic, and like Sebastian started like commenting on issues and stuff. And I was like, wow, like real serious projects are looking at this like crazy tool. Let me just see, I'm just going to do whatever it takes to make it like a feasible choice for them. And just started like, cranking through like all the issues and all the things that we were missing. So it escalated pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah. Did it surprise you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, like, well, I was convinced that I had faced like this problem around tooling as like our code base got large in my last company, and that there was an opportunity to like build like better, more performant tooling. I genuinely wasn't sure like how widely that message would resonate with people. And so I don't know, it's like a little bit of luck, right? Like sometimes you work on great projects and then like they go nowhere, and like just no one happens to see it. And then sometimes you work on a good thing and like it does go somewhere. And so there are certain things that are within your control, certain things that aren't. I feel like I did a good job of like communicating the project and like why it was interesting and why it was exciting. But I also feel like I got a little bit lucky that it just like gravitated towards the right people and got attention in the right ways.
Sure. Also, maybe that Black had existed, which is a little ironic because Black kind of solves that real similar problem. But like people were, okay, we embrace the idea of the thing that Rough does really well. You just convince them to use Rough in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, we have a little bit, it gets back to this. Like we have a little bit of like a second mover advantage, right? Where like there's a lot of existing tools that people use already, and like a lot of those practices, like the idea of using a formatter, the idea of running code mods, like the idea of using a linter, and like the knowledge of like what kinds of rules are valuable and like what kinds of analysis we can do. Like all that stuff existed, and that was part of the story. Really, was I was like, these tools are great, and I get a lot of value out of them, but I want them to be like easier and faster. And so, yeah, there's definitely a strong timing thing. I think Rust too. This is maybe like a little bit more specific to what we're doing, but like, I think like the intersection between Python and Rust has gotten, or I guess the interoperability between them and sort of the ecosystem around it has just grown a lot. I mean, still, I would say like pretty early, but it's like matured and grown a lot over the past few years. And so even just the fact that like at my last company, we started to introduce Rust, and we started to like move some of our core systems into Rust and expose them over PyO3. Like the fact that that existed and the fact that I was like exposed to that, like that's all just like pure chance. Otherwise, I never would have thought to do this.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, congrats. Well deserved.
Thanks.
All using Rough, as we said, is excellent. Will, Rich is awesome. Why do you think it took off? Did you try stuff before?
Yeah.
What's the story?
I tried a lot of stuff before. Before GitHub. Coding has always been my hobby. I'd do it for work and I'd come home and work on a hobby project, and it just seemed natural to want to share it. Pre-GitHub, I would just put stuff on my blog and get some feedback from it there. I quite enjoyed that. And yeah, I have a number of open source projects pre-Rich. I had a BB code parsing library. I had a chess library. I had a web toolkit. So yeah, when Rich came along, it was another hobby project, something to keep me entertained.
Why is this terminal so boring? Come on, see what we can do.
Yeah. Well, I'd always used the terminal, and it always struggled when you've got a page of white text on black background, and you're trying to pick out an IP address from somewhere. And I'd always wished, I wish it would just format it and colorize it for me. I know this is possible, but it doesn't happen. So then, yeah, I started it, and it came together quite well. When I released it, it was like, boom, the stars just started accumulating. I got lots of feedback. It was very exciting, and I kept building on it. It was kind of like issue-driven development. So people would just ask for something, and that's a good idea, and go ahead and add that and implement it, and it grew from there, and it became really large. I did actually prior to Rich, I had a library called PyFileSystem, and this is kind of like a wrapper to file systems, so you can have the same interface for your FTP server as a hard drive for a zip file S3 bucket, and that got some use in the community. It wasn't enormous, but that taught me a lot about building open source, managing feedback and issues, etc. So that was a great experience when I started working on Rich, and I was very surprised actually how successful it became. I remember the first time I realized that this was bigger than just a hobby project is when someone told me off for violating SemVer. I released a clear breaking change because I thought, nobody's using that yet. But they were. So the next day I got told off quite appropriately. And then I thought, okay, I'll have to take this more seriously. If people are using this in their day job, they can't just have someone who's just like throwing new bits of code and changing functionality. I had to treat it like it was an actual my day job.
Yeah. Well, everyone on the call here probably has a little bit of nervousness about like, if I break this, there are a lot of people that depend on this thing.
Yeah.
And it's so different. Like it just changes so much. Or like when you were talking about the issue-driven development thing too, I was like, I just remember that phase of like Rough where it was like anyone who cared all about the project, all I wanted to do is like make them happy. Right. And I was like, oh wow, like that seems like a cool idea. Like let's definitely do it. And I would just like, it was the point in time where I could like fix the bug, cut a release the same day, and then like their thing is fixed. And then it's like, okay, great. Now we have a relationship. Like, thanks for using my thing. Like, blah, blah, blah. I just think like, but that's changed so much, right? Because then I went through the same experiences of like, I ship a release with a breaking change that I didn't really document. A lot of people get upset, and then you realize, okay, I actually have some more responsibility now.
Yeah, these days it's more like trying to find the balance between saying no to stuff that you then have to end up maintaining and not like disappointing
Yeah.
people too much because you say no, or things like that, and then trying to keep this whole interaction with people nice, even though you don't want to do stuff they want you to do.
Yeah, I have
Because
this
you know it's
analogy.
better for the project.
Yeah, PRs are like cake or puppies. So if it's a simple bug fix, that's like cake. You'd like, thank you. I enjoyed that cake. Then move on. But some PRs are like a puppy. It's like terrific. You like puppies, but you've got to feed them and clean up after them. And
Why am I standing in the rain with this puppy on like a Friday night? How did I get here?
yeah, so sometimes you have to
Collecting the
say,
puppies poop.
Yes, exactly.
sometimes you say thank you, but I just can't look after another puppy right now. And that's a difficult thing to come to terms with when the project gets a bit more mature. Because previously you're accepting all the puppies, but then you have to start saying no to puppies. And Rich definitely got there because it accumulated.
Will, do you hate puppies? Come on, that's a pretty hard stance.
I'm kind of a cat person, to be honest with you. But
There we
yeah, I
have
mean,
it.
you have to say no
Unacceptable.
eventually. Yeah.
I think this is where plugins always kind of like take the center stage, right? You're like, just, oh, that sounds like a great idea for you to maintain external to my library.
That was
Yeah.
exactly my approach to the whole situation. Yeah. Here's
Yeah,
a plugin
also-
API. Have fun.
But also the probability of some little change breaking someone's code and like being considered a breaking change grows as the project grows in usage. And like, you know, like at some point it's like almost any change will end up breaking someone in very unexpected ways because they are doing something really, really weird, but you know, like someone is doing it. So like it becomes more and more difficult to know, like, is this a breaking change or not? Like, no one should be using this variable here or this parameter, but like, you know, there's someone out there doing that. So I don't know. I feel defining what is actually a breaking change and what is a strict Semver gets more difficult as things grow. Yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like that the Django project did was kind of basically only things that are documented are supported. Basically, that was kind of the line they drew, and I thought that was a pretty good way to draw it. But yeah, you're always, you know, that never actually works. That doesn't make people happy. It just gives you plausible deniability. Right?
Don't yell at me. It's not my fault.
Yeah, I think adding a formal like versioning policy is one of the best things that we did, because for a long time, Rough was just, we only used patch releases, so we got to like 0.0, like 285 or something, and we had basically no guarantees about what would or wouldn't change like across releases. And as the project got more and more popular, like that started to cause like more and more problems. And so Zany, someone on our team, like when they joined, one of the first few things they did was like create an actual formal versioning policy, and we added like preview behavior. So like you can opt, similar to what Black has, you can kind of opt in to like breaking or more experimental changes. And so now we have like clear expectations around what it means to like bump a minor release, et cetera, and like that has made our lives a lot easier, like actually having clear expectations around that are communicated and respected. But it's the kind of thing that you just don't think about at all until at least I didn't, until the Ratchet got bigger.
Yeah, some people's code runs things like Fast API or Octoprint or whatever. Your stuff rewrites people's code.
Yeah, but it doesn't run at runtime. I don't know. I actually think it's easier.
Yep.
Indeed. I do say, I mean, it's like, it's funny you talk about the plugins thing, because like I've actually like very intentionally taken the opposite approach, which is we have like almost no public API because like the only public API is the CLI, and like we don't expose our API in any other way. And that's because like we know we're going to change like everything internally like pretty dramatically, and so we wanted to have like full control over that without having to worry about breaking people's stuff yet. But it's like it's starting to become more of a problem because more and more people want to use it as a library in like different ways. But it's, I don't know, it's like it's sort of a counterintuitive way to like make our lives easier as maintainers, was like not expose any public API apart from the CLI.
Yeah, very interesting.
There's a funny sort of anecdote. I'm rewriting a lot of the documentation for SQL model because I want to have examples. Right now I have examples that are compatible with Python 3.7 and above. well, actually 3.6 and above, but I want to have also the syntax for 3.9 and 3.10. In 3.10, you can have like the unions using the vertical bar and these things. And I want to have example for each one of those. So the approach I did was to write a script that will automatically update each one of the files by calling rough as a sub process. So that's the API. And then like doing all that stuff, but like it's like another fanboy of Rough trying to use it as an API before it's available.
Yeah, I've heard this before as API,
right? An API will be created.
Exactly. I've heard this before as like Hiram's law, which is like with a sufficiently large number of users, like any implementation detail someone will eventually rely on an implementation detail. Like any arbitrary implementation, someone is probably relying on that behavior, which is basically the behavior of the program is the API in the end. Unfortunately.
Yeah, they'll find the underscore functions you've tried to dissuade them from using and all the things. Yeah. Eric, what's the origin story for Read the Docs, and what did you try and how do you think it caught on?
Yeah, so I mean, this was kind of way back in the day, but yeah, I kind of got started writing Django plugins, apropos to the conversation. I was working at the Lawrence Journal World, where Django came from, and it was kind of early in my career, and I was just kind of getting excited about open source and blogging, and just basically built a few of these kind of testing-related open source projects. And then that was kind of where I got started with open source. And then basically it was the classic scratch your own itch thing, right? Like it's like, I have a bunch of open source projects. I want to write documentation. How do I solve that problem? And back in the day, that was a much harder problem to solve, right? It was basically just like build a zip file and upload it to packages.python.org, if folks remember that one. Mm-hmm. Or was it packages or whatever the docs, there was a docs hosting on PyPI basically. And yeah, basically just wanted to kind of build a better version of that integrated with GitHub. I feel like webhooks were like the cool new thing back in 2010, and so that was really kind of the insight, right? It's like, let's build this kind of like CI/CD workflow on top of webhooks, and actually did build a kind of a version of that the previous year around kind of like code quality stuff. So it actually ran kind of like a linter and built a website on commit and had a similar kind of workflow, right? Where it like gave you a grade and did all this kind of stuff, which is like 2009. And yeah, that didn't really catch on at all. But then I think Read the Docs, we built it, and then I was using it for my own projects, and I actually had the need to kind of maintain it and keep it updated. And then I think people just kind of grew naturally, gave some conference talks, that kind of stuff. But I think it just solved a problem that people had, and that's always going to be the best way to grow a thing. So
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. What's Read the Docs written in? Is it Django?
Yep. Yeah, it's all Django and Python.
Right on. Funny coincidence. I went to college in Lawrence at the University of Kansas. So
nice.
I was right there, right at the heart of Django, but I moved off to grad school like a couple of years before all that happened. So I missed
it's funny. Everybody, I grew up in Virginia, and everyone was like, "You're going to Kansas? You graduated school? Like, what? How are you going there? Like, what?" Everybody thought it was the weirdest decision, but yeah, like I really do think ending up in that Python and Django ecosystem has been pretty transformative to my life. So worked out.
Lawrence is a pretty cool little town, actually. Of all the places, yeah. Sebastian, how do you come about this crazy idea to put types into our web apps? Python, that's dynamic. It doesn't have types. What are you doing?
Yeah, I don't know. So crazy. It's so fun to see. It said Michael Larson in the chat, like the maintainer of URLD3 and the Python security developer in residence, just like chatting along with us. Like he probably has had to deal with so much stuff as us. I'm
sure.
So like some of the first things that I did in open source were actually Docker images for deploying Flask, because I was working with Flask, and deploying Flask was difficult, and I needed to be able to combine Nginx with uWSGI and like a bunch of things, and like they all had their own custom configuration files, and it was was so difficult. I didn't like doing that. And then I just had to study how to do that stuff. And then after going through all that, I wanted to save everyone else's time doing that. So it was like, well, let's just put a Docker image with this and a lot of documentation of how this Docker image works and how you can use it with some sensible defaults. So, it was just like a weird contraption. That was it. but it actually grew and like got like a few stars, like a bunch of stars. For me, it was a lot, like, like 100 stars. Oh my gosh, I'm an open source developer. And then like at some point it had like 1,000 stars or something like that. I was so happy about that. And at some point it was kind of the de facto standard for doing Flask, Docker, Flask in Docker. That was then the first thing that I did. I ended up with FastAPI. I was avoiding building FastAPI for a long while, and I was trying all the frameworks and all the other tools. I was convinced that there was something that would do the things that I wanted. I just had to find it. And as I was trying different frameworks, also in different languages, I was extending the list of things that I wanted to have, and also the list of things that I wanted not to have. For example, I didn't want to have,
that takes you farther and farther away from any framework solving your problem.
Having one that would tick all the boxes. So it was like, but then I realized, like, I really like this thing of having types, as in TypeScript, because you get auto-completion and inline errors. And this is so cool. It's so cool to be able to have this. I want to have this in Python, and then Python added type annotations. And it's like, this is great. How do I use them? There's no way to use them with the current frameworks. So at some point, I actually found the right framework. It was called API Star by the same author of Django REST framework. And it was just missing some authentication stuff. I said, like, okay, I'm going to contribute to the auth stuff. When I was about to jump into the code, he said, I have to deprecate this. I will go focus full on Starlet. And then he went to build Starlet. This is Tom Christie, which is super prolific and an amazing open source person in general. And then at that point is when I said, like, damn it, I just have to try it. Let's just do it. So I'm just going to try to build something that will be kind of a spiritual successor to API Star, built on top of Starlet. So I was, I was actually inheriting all the learnings from Flask, Django REST framework, and all the ecosystem, and just like bringing all those ideas together. At least that was my intention. And then I wanted to have a bit of better type annotations. So I saw that Pydantic was using standard type annotation. So people wouldn't have to learn this, like, from FastAPI import special string or something like that. Just instead of that, just use pure string. So I wanted to have something based on standards, like OpenAPI, JSON schema, and all the stuff, and based on standard Python, and to have like the simplest syntax possible, and to, give the best developer experience possible, while, not adding like any additional steps for developers to build something that by default will have all the best practices built in. That was the intention. And I was just like trying to solve it for the things that I was working on. I was supposed to be doing AI and machine learning and stuff, but like I had to stop for a bit to solve APIs, and I got stuck in APIs, and that's how I ended up with FastAPI.
Oh, I think you made a pretty decent choice. It seems like FastAPI is doing all right.
Yeah.
I just saw you
much better than what I ever had expected.
Yeah, I know. Congratulations. It's also deserved. But I also just saw a post on X Twitter, however you would address these things, where you said you showed a graph where the number of GitHub stars for FastAPI just passed Flask. And, I have a lot of respect for Flask and the Palace team and David Lord and all those folks, but awesome that your stuff is taken off so much. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's amazing. And like Flask was one of the big inspirations for FastAPI, and I've been able to be at this point is crazy. Like I still can't get over it. Yeah, super cool to be able to build all this and to keep building more stuff. So yeah, it's super nice.
Yeah, one final comment before we move on to Octoprint. But one of the things I kind of see you doing in the world is you're like the combiner. You're like, oh, we've got this cool stuff with Pydantic and Starlet, and how can we combine it in this way to make this, and Swagger, and like similarly with SQL Model, you're like, well, Pydantic is cool, but SQL Alchemy is kind of cool, but it could be better, it could be better, right? So anyway, good job.
Yeah, and also like Typer, that is the library for building command line applications. You just click with the type annotations, the same ideas from Pydantic, and now with integrated built-in support for Rich. So it's like also picking Will's work, trying just to put a bunch of things together. I'm just, I'm just making cocktails everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
It's more than that, but there is a lot of value in combining things in a smart way, an accessible way.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Gina, you told us a little bit about the origin story, but like, what did you try before? And then I have a follow-up question I think is unique to your project.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I tried anything before because the whole thing was completely unintentional. I basically bought myself a 3D printer in late 2012. I wanted to be able to put it in my spare bathroom and monitor it from afar, because back then this thing was tying up my PC. You had to constantly keep it connected so it could operate, and that for hours and hours, and it made noises and it produced fumes, and I just wanted it out of my office. And to be able to play games on my PC again instead of having it, basically communicate constantly with a 3D printer. And so I bought myself a Raspberry Pi, and I was looking online for something to be able to just put on this Pi and attach to the printer and throw a Wi-Fi dongle in, because back then the Pi didn't have Wi-Fi built in, and throw that in the spare bathroom, but there wasn't anything. So over the course of my Christmas break in 2012, I sat down and changed that. And this is basically the origin story of Octoprint. I just wanted to scratch my own itch. I wanted to put my printer in my spare bathroom. This is all. And apparently a lot of people had the same problem, because I just, like how we like to do these things. We build something that we think might be interesting. We throw it up on GitHub and go just like here, go nuts, enjoy, have fun with that. And I suddenly started getting emails from all around the world, like, hey, I have this in this printer. Can you also make it work with that? And so this escalated, and I went like, oh, someone is using it. Of course, I'm going to add this support. And of course, I'm going to add this feature. And it just grew and grew and grew and grew. And apparently I just hit a nerve. So this was utterly unplanned. Yeah. This was never my intention at all. And I just wanted to solve my own problem and have continued to solve my own problems and the problems of other people ever since. Before Octoprint, I actually was also quite active in a little project called DokuWiki, where I was developing some plugins for that. And I even did open source before I knew what open source was, with some PHP scripts when I was 18 or so that I threw up on my website. But Octoprint was like, it took over my life. It just was an accident, a happy little accident, maybe. But
yeah. How'd you decide, okay, this is a job for me rather than just a thing you worked on?
Yeah, so the thing is, by mid-2013, I went to 80% on my regular day job. I used to be a software architect / consultant with big corporation, Java World, all that enterprise stuff. And to be able to dedicate 1 day per week fully to Octoprint, plus, of course, the weekends and the after hours and the vacations and all of that. And that still didn't suffice anymore by 2014. And I noticed that it was impacting my health. It was impacting my relationships. And that was actually quite perfect timing, really, when this company that hired me initially approached me and said, hey, do you want to maybe fly out to us and we'll chat? And if you like all of that, what we have to propose, then we can just do that. And this is how it then continued to go from 2014 until 2016. And yeah, it was never my intention to become self-employed. I'm a quite risk-averse person, actually. So when this point came where I was like, okay, either I find a way to keep funding this, or I have to really drop it, because it was way too big by then to be kept as a pet project without being utterly unhealthy. I decided to jump into the cold water and have been trying to keep up at the surface ever since, basically. So all of that really completely unplanned.
Yeah, cool. What an adventure, huh?
Indeed, yeah. And the good thing is, even if people don't understand what open source is or what code is, I always have quite a topic at parties. So that is fun, because like, people give you money for something they can get for free. What?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's if you're not familiar with open source, then it definitely is a weird.
Absolutely, it was tricky to find a tax consultant who understands the concept. So
yeah, I can imagine.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
I'm sure. All right. Well,
I was very recently. I was like, "What do you do? What is your day job?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm a software developer." So you work for a company? Not free. So I built software that is free for others to use. And who's paying you? A company that pays money to companies to build companies. So you're building a company? No, it's actually, it was a long conversation. They got bored and left. That was it.
Like this
Yeah,
doesn't make
I've
any
just-
sense. Yeah.
I've just taken to say I'm a software developer and I work with 3D printers, and then people usually stop asking questions because 3D printers are this mysterious thing that no one understands anyhow, usually at least. And then, yeah, unless they say, oh, 3D printers. And then I say, yeah, do you know 3D printers? And they go, yeah, I have one. And then I can say, oh, do you know Octoprint? Yes. Oh, yeah, I made that. And then, oh, but yeah, it's tricky to explain to people. I'm sometimes not even sure my parents understand what I do. So
I'm sure that my parents don't understand what I do. But that's okay. I'm sure they're still proud of you anyway. It's fine.
yeah, mine
All right, so
definitely are proud of me.
I would like to just maybe we're getting a little short on time here, coming up to the end of our Avengers meeting. Let's close it out with this. Go around one more time, let y'all, or maybe just as a group, kind of chime in on this. You know, speaking to the people out there listening who want to start an open source project or want to contribute to open source or somehow kind of get involved in similar ways, what would you do different if you started now, right? Many of you have been working on this for a long time. You've had a lot of experience. Like if somebody said, well, the world is, somehow the memory has been erased from the fact that Rough or Rich or Octoprint or whatever existed, to start over, what would you do different or the same?
I would use Fast API.
Yay!
Yeah, good use of a time machine there. Everybody, like, I've had multiple conversations over the years where people are like, "Why don't you use this library?" And I'm like, "Oh, it didn't exist."
Exactly. Yeah, that is the problem, right? And and when you actually have a plug-in system, then swapping out stuff like that can become very tricky. Like, yeah. So, but
absolutely.
I don't know, when I get asked like what to work on, what to study, what to focus, how to get into open source, or like almost any of those questions, I always say that the main advice I give is just to focus on a problem that is important to you, more than like innovation, market disruption, or whatever. Just like focus on a problem that is actually important to you. Hopefully that is important to others as well. And if it's not a problem that affects you directly, hopefully it affects someone that is very close to you, so you can get like a very tight feedback loop of what you are building. And then try to solve that. And then use that as the guide of what to do, what to learn, what to focus on, and what to do. In many cases, it's just learning a framework that it's already there. Like, why will I go and build a system to control 3D printers instead of just like learning how to use Octoprint? In many cases, solving the problem is just like using the tool that is already there. But then in some cases, you end up figuring out that there's no tool and you just have to build it. There's actually no linter and formatter that can be super fast, so you can run it every time you just hit save. So then you just have to build it in Rust and like create Rust. Or like, there's always like this thing that you are trying to solve that is just not solved there yet. And that is what gives you the best value and the best outcome. In many cases, it can be just like, contributing to another open source project or building something new. But the thing is, like, for me, is just like focusing on a problem that is important. That is what has worked for me, at least.
Yeah, good advice.
I would add to that you really shouldn't try to. I mean, you need to be really passionate about the thing as well, right? It needs to be something that is really something you're into, something that will want to spend a lot of time on, that is actually not your working hours and such, because otherwise the whole jog until this becomes anything viable, anything big enough to support you in any kind of way, even if it's just being able to, I don't know, drink an additional coffee per week or something, that will be a quite long slog and a lot of work and a lot of blood and sweat and tears. And so you really need to be into this so that you want to do that. If you are just in that for the end goal of, I don't know, becoming rich through open source, which by the way will probably not work.
Only
then, then
I got rich.
Then okay, that was unintentional. Then this will not work out. You need to focus on the path to the goal and not the goal. Like, a lot of people try to reach for the end goal before they actually are willing to actually walk the path. I also get this along. I happen to be in the GitHub Star program, and I've had a lot of people ask me, how do you become a GitHub Star? And that is just the wrong question to ask. That's just the same as it is, how do you become an open source maintainer of a popular project? Like you just have to do whatever you are interested in. You have to do work, and you have to be passionate about your work. And then maybe if you hit the right nerve, then that will happen, and maybe it won't. I mean,
yeah.
And I guess
it's very interesting that none of us had like a career path to where we are now. We didn't set out to be where we are now. It just feels like we were kind of followed our own intuition, and it worked out. Which means it's very difficult when someone asks me, well, how do you become an open source developer? How do you start a company? It's like, I'm not quite sure. I can tell you my path to there. But it's very hard for me to articulate to someone else how to get there.
I think there's a lot of luck involved as well, right? It's like you have to do all this stuff and then roll this dice. If it gets a 6, then you can be successful.
Yeah, there's an element of luck, but it's kind of like a luck you make for yourself. And it might take you to somewhere else, or it might not. But as long as you're passionate about it and you enjoy it, then great things will happen, I think.
Well, also, Will and Charlie, you both took some specific time on your own money to really level up what you're working on, that's pretty brave, right? Like, not a lot of people would say, I'm just going to spend my savings to work on this project and see if I can make it go. So I mean, you've earned some of that through taking that chance and putting in that time and effort, I think.
For me, that didn't last very long because after 3 months, I was living on GitHub sponsorship. And then VCs came along, and then there was like cash, and everything changed.
Then your world changed, and you had to learn a whole new set of skills, I'm sure.
And then I had a job and responsibilities.
I do feel really lucky that, like I said, this is my first time being a maintainer, and like it was very clear to me quickly that like for Rough to have the pace of development and like the scope that it has, it like had to be a full-time thing. And like that was pretty obvious to me quickly. And I have a lot of respect for people who have been maintainers for longer periods of time and in a way where it's not their full-time job or they have to do it on the side. I think I haven't really been in that position. But it's already clear to me that takes like a lot of dedication and commitment. So I feel very lucky that I get to work on open source full time. I know it's not all entirely luck, right? Like we were saying, like you increase your luck surface area and then opportunities come your way. But like, but I do think it's just a very fortunate position that like these kind of opportunities do exist. Because maintaining popular stuff is a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there are privileges that come with it 100%, but I mean, yeah, it's a ton. It's a lot of work and a lot of stress and a lot of responsibility.
Well, and you don't necessarily have to start your own.
I didn't have gray hair
away.
before this time.
You don't necessarily have to start your own either. You could contribute to a really popular one and kind of get into the scene. And, like Eric, that sounds a little bit like your story. Like you were in the Django scene and then spun off from that, what you guys are doing, right?
Yeah, definitely. And, part of an open source community, and definitely kind of going to PyCon and just kind of being surrounded by those people. Cause that was always it's very lonely work just to have an inbox of GitHub issues and then no inbox thank yous, and like going to conferences and that kind of stuff was really where you feel the appreciation and you really kind of actually feel the value that you're providing, as well as just the stress of the things you're breaking. So
totally agree with that.
Absolutely. The conferences are great to really feel the appreciation rather than just the
they'll say thank you and then they'll give you a bug report, but at least the thank you.
Well, while I'm talking to you, there was this, could I just show you this one thing we're doing that's not working right? Like, oh gosh.
I do think an interesting observation for me has been that like a year ago, I didn't really know anyone in Python open source, like at all. And like I was a user of Python in my day job every day, but like I was not interacting with Python. And in a year, now like Sebastian, we've interacted a bunch. Like there's just a lot of people that I've come to know and think of as like friends. So I think they're really, especially if you're interested in getting involved and like putting in work, I really don't think there are significant barriers. And like you get out of it what you put in. So I think I've been very impressed with just how welcoming and friendly the community has been, especially other maintainers.
Yeah, absolutely. talk to a lot of people who show up at PyCon and they're like, I was really nervous to come here, or I feel like it didn't fit in, and they're, you know, they just had such a great experience. And I said, well, did you feel
that was me? That was my first PyCon this year. I'd never been to I'd never been to a Python conference, and so I was like,
and we ended up at such an amazing party.
For me as well.
Benihana.
Yeah, that's true. Above the Benihana. Yeah.
That was interesting. All right, guys. Well, I think we are pretty much out of time. Anyone want to have some final thoughts for listeners before we wrap it up?
Go and build some cool stuff.
Who's brave enough?
How can maintain it today, I think.
Yes. Give cake, not puppies. Let's
Yeah.
leave it with that, huh? All right, give cake, not puppies.
And be
Right.
really careful before you start a popular open source project. It might take over your life. If you want this, great. But if not, then
Yeah, careful what you wish for. You might get it.
exactly.
All right. Gina, Sebastian, Eric, Will, Charlie, thank you all for being on the show. This has been a ton of fun.
Thank you very much for
Pleasure.
having
Thank
us.
you.
A
Thank
pleasure
you.
and an honor to be with these amazing people.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
invitation.
I agree.
Honestly, I had a blast just like hearing everyone's stories because I hadn't heard any of this before. So thanks to everyone else, and thanks, Michael.
Yeah, you bet. Bye all.